Hey you guys, what's up? My name's Jason and today I'm going to be taking you through this tutorial on how to create a 2D potion bottle asset for your games. So let's go ahead and jump right in and get started. So I'm going to create a new document. Now this document can be whatever size you want it to be. I recommend that you make it pretty large just because if you ever need a close-up shot of the bottle in your game, you're going to want a very large version of it so you don't lose resolution. So I'm going to go File, New, and then I'm going to make it 1000 pixels by 1000 pixels. And we can put the resolution at 150. Then we'll go ahead and hit OK. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and fill that in with a dark gray. So I'm going to come down to about there, I'll hit OK. Then using my fill tool, I'm going to fill that background in. And then I just want to add a soft highlight into the center. So I'm going to switch over to my brush tool, make sure I'm on a soft edged brush. And I'm going to bring that size up very large. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and come back to my dark gray color and find a little bit lighter version of that. And then I'll go ahead and paint right into the center like so. Next, let's go ahead and start creating the shape for our bottle. So I'm going to add a new layer above this, and then I'm going to select the color black. So I'm going to take my marquee tool and I'm going to go ahead and create a circle like so, and I'm holding down shift while I do that. That way I get a perfect circle that doesn't lose its proportions. And then I'm going to go ahead and get that into the location that I want it. So I want it about right there. And then I'm going to go ahead and fill that in with the color black. And then I'm going to go ahead and use my marquee tool again on a new layer. And I want to make sure I'm on my rectangular marquee tool. And this is going to be the stem of or the neck of our bottle. So I'll make a rectangle like so, fill that in. And this is why we did it on a separate layer, so that we can get it centered like so. And then you can bring that up or down however you want. I'm going to leave it about there. And lastly, we need to make the top part of our bottle. So I'm going to use my brush tool for this. And I want to make sure that I'm on a hard-edged brush. And I'm just going to go ahead and zoom in there and start painting in the shape of that top piece. So first off, we're going to want sort of an oval shape like so. So I'm going to start painting that in. And this can be pretty rough because we can always go back and erase if we mess up. That's one of the great things about working in Photoshop is you can always erase, take away, add more, take away. And you don't really get that option when you're making physical artwork. Perfect. Next, I'm going to go ahead and shrink my neck down just a little bit using my transform tool, which is Control T, or if you're on a Mac, it's going to be Command T. And then you're going to go ahead and just click this corner and drag it down and hold down Shift to make sure that you keep your proportions. So I'm going to bring it down to about that size. And then I'll recenter that. Perfect. I think that will just look a little bit more interesting having a big body with a tiny neck. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and merge these two layers together. So now we have the basic shape for our bottle. What I want to do next is I want to start painting in the contents of this bottle inside of it. So I'm going to add a new layer above this. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to right click that layer and I'm going to come up to Create Clipping Mask. What this does is now that layer is a clipping mask for the bottle shape layer, meaning anything I paint on this top layer cannot go outside of the shape of this bottle layer. Let me show you what I mean real quick. So if I grab a yellow, which is going to be the next color we want to use, so I'm going to come up almost completely saturated, but if I go ahead and try painting in here, you'll see that it won't paint anywhere except for within that shape. Now if I were to drag this out of there, and it no longer is a clipping layer mask, you'll see that it actually was painting out of there. It's just clipping it so you can't see it. So I'm going to undo that, put it back to a clipping layer mask. And what I want to do now is I want to switch over to my marquee tool, and I want to grab my elliptical marquee tool. And I'm going to go ahead and click from one side of my bottle, so as close to the edge as I can get, so right about there. And I'm going to drag it all the way over like so. And if it gets a little bit off, you can drag it a little bit more over to the side. So that way, that area right there makes up the difference for over here. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to drag that selection over until it lines up perfectly with the edge of my bottle. So about there looks good. And now I want to go ahead and fill that in with my yellow. Perfect. So that's the top of our liquid in our bottle. Next, I'm going to go ahead and add an outer glow to this just to make it look a little bit more interesting. So I'm going to come down to FX at the bottom of my layers panel. And then I'm going to come over to outer glow. Now I already have it set up the way I want it, so I have the color yellow selected, and I have my opacity set to 25%, and my size is set to 43 pixels, and my speed is set to 8%. So about there should be good. I'll go ahead and hit OK. So now we have a nice glow to that. Next, I'm going to go ahead and add a new layer underneath this, And by doing that, it's going to automatically create a clipping layer mask. Then I'm gonna go ahead and select a more orange color. So I'm gonna come down into my oranges. So about there should be good. I'll hit OK. And then using my brush tool, I just want to go ahead and paint this bottom area in. Now I want it actually a little bit darker. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my orange and I'm going to drag it down just the tiniest bit to there. And now I'm going to go ahead and start painting that in. And I'm going to paint in this entire bottom area just like so. Next, what I want to do is I'm going to start adding some more detail to this to make it look more like liquid. Now usually when there's liquid, it's a little bit transparent or it's completely transparent and it makes some weird light refractions. So we're going to create those right now. So I'm going to switch over to a orange color. So I'm going to come more into my oranges and I want to darken that a little bit to about there, and then I'll hit OK. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to paint in this bottom area, but I want to make sure that I'm on a soft edged brush. And then I want to bring up my size. And I'm going to put my opacity at 10%. The way you do this is by hitting the number 1 on your keyboard. And we could possibly even go a little bit lower than that by coming up here to where it says opacity. And if you go ahead and put this drop down arrow, you can go ahead and drag this slider back and forth, and we're going to put it more at like 5%. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to start painting in this bottom area like so. Now the opacity is so low that you can't even hardly see it. You probably can't actually see it at all. But what you need to do is you need to keep layering it and layering it. The reason why we have our opacity set so low is because we want there to be a nice gradual blend between the two colors, our dark orange and our light yellow orange. And if we have our opacity set too high, you're going to see that blend and it's not going to look very good. Alright, so you can see what I did was I created that nice shading gradient and I kind of made it in a C shape. So it just goes right across like so, and I tried to leave out these edges so they're a little bit lighter. I still went over them a little bit, but I tried to leave them out more than I did in this area. So it goes from light to dark to a little bit more light, but this area out here is not as light as this area in the center. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and switch over to a darker color. So I'm going to come into more of my reds first off, and then I'm going to drag that down so it's darker. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing and start painting with that. But this time I only want to focus on this bottom area, so it's going to be kind of like a half C shape. Alright, now this line right here between this sort of dark red color and this light orange color is kind of getting too hard for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and select this middle color that's the blend between the two of them, and then painting at 5% opacity with that color, I'm going to go ahead and paint right in the center, and that's going to blend that in a lot more and make it look a lot better. Next, I'm going to add a little bit more highlight in the center area, so I'm going to select my light yellow color, and then I'm going to go ahead and brush a tiny little bit of that in at 5%. Perfect. Next, I'm going to go ahead and use this yellow color still, and I'm going to paint along this outside edge. I'm bringing my brush size down pretty small because I just want it right on that edge. And I'm still painting at 5% opacity, so I have to keep painting over it again and again and again. But this is good. It makes that nice gradual build up, and it allows you to control the shape of your line. Perfect. Alright, next what we want to do is we want to go ahead and merge these two layers together. So I'm going to select both these layers, and then I'm going to right click them and merge them. So now that's one layer. And what I want to do now is I want to select the shape of my bottle. So I'm going to select that shape by holding down Control or Command if you're on a Mac, and then you're going to click and select your bottle shape. Next, what you're going to do is you're going to invert your selection by hitting Control-Shift-I. And now you can see that inverts the selection, so rather than selecting the bottle shape, it's selecting this outside area. You can tell because the dotted line is on the outside of your document. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit delete. Now what that's done is it's deleted anything that I've painted outside of my shape. So what I can do now is I can go ahead and shrink this down. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Control-T or Command-T to bring up my transform tool, and then I can shrink that down like so. And make sure that you hold down Shift and Alt at the same time while you do this. That way it shrinks in proportion and it shrinks from the center. So I want to shrink it down to about that size should be good. We'll go ahead and hit enter. Now the reason why I've done this is because we're going to add a nice highlight around the edge of our bottle, but I want a dark area between the highlight and the actual liquid, because that's going to be the actual refracted light, or the lack of refracted light. So let's go ahead and create that highlighted edge now. So I'm going to create a new layer, but I'm going to create it underneath my liquid layer, and then I'm going to drag that above it. The reason why I did that is because it's a quick way to create a clipping layer mask, because it automatically will create that clipping layer mask if you create it under another clipping layer mask. So what I want to do now is I want to go ahead and fill this in with the color white. So I'll go ahead and use my paint bucket tool and fill that in. Then I'm going to switch over to my erase tool, and I'm going to grab a hard-edged brush, and I'm going to bring the brush size all the way up to about this size. We want it to be just a little bit smaller than our actual bottle. Now we can come into our brush settings and we can actually play with the size of our brush. So I'm going to bring that up to about, it was at 500, so I'm going to try 525, see how that works. I think that size will work perfect. All right, let's go ahead and erase out the center of our bottle. Great. Now we can still erase a little bit more, so if we come over to that edge a little bit more and a little bit more to that edge, and we'll go around all the way. And the highlight around the edge, the thickness of it can differ. Whoops, not that much, but it can differ a little bit. It's okay if it's not perfect. All right, so now we have the highlighted edge around our bottle. We want to grab our eraser again, and we want to erase away the inside area of this top area too, but we still want to leave that highlight right on the edge. So I'm just going to go ahead and manually, by hand, erase that all away, and I just want to keep that edge in there. All right, great. So now that we've done that, it's time to start adding our second layer of highlight. So this is our refracted light around the edge. So this light is probably hitting it from this side, and it's probably hitting it from the back side and the front side. And you're seeing it right along that edge. But now it's time to add the light that's hitting it from this front surface. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to add a new layer, and we can drag it under and then drag it back. That way it creates an automatic clipping layer mask. And then I'm going to switch over to my brush tool and making sure I'm on a soft edge brush. I'm going to bring my brush size up really big, so somewhere about there. And then I'm going to go ahead and paint a nice big spot like so. And then what I want to do is I want to start erasing this away in certain areas. So first off, I'm going to switch over to my erase tool and making sure you're on a hard edge brush. You're going to bring your brush size up to about the size of your bottle, and then you're going to erase right there, just like so. Next, you're going to go ahead and bring your brush size down, and you want to erase away this top area just like so. And what you want to do is you want to connect this area with that area. So we're going to come around again, just like so, and then we'll connect that together. And don't worry about it being perfect. It's all right if it's not perfect. Next, let's grab a soft-edged erase tool brush, and we're going to bring up the size quite a bit. So we'll bring it up to about there, and then we're going to go ahead and erase away that bottom area like so. That was a little bit too much, so I'm going to try it further down. We want to keep this top area pretty highlighted, so we might try shrinking our brush size down. We're just trying to get rid of this bottom area a little bit more. All right, next what we want to do is we want to create a new layer, and we can create it underneath this one, and we're going to do the same thing that we did up here, but down here at the bottom. So using my brush tool again, I'm going to go ahead and paint in an area like so, and then switching over to my eraser and making sure that I get back on a hard-edged brush. I'm going to bring up my brush size to about the size of my bottle, and I'm going to go ahead and erase away this bottom area like so. Perfect. Then I'm going to switch over to a soft-edged brush, and then we can go ahead and bring up our brush size, or sorry, our eraser size, and then we can go ahead and erase away these outer areas like so. Especially over here, we don't want those overlapping. And then I'm actually going to even grab this and drag it more over to this side. I think that looks better. Perfect. All right, so now we have the reflections on this part of our bottle. Now we need to move on to this top area. So let's go in there and let's add a new layer. And on this layer, we're going to go ahead and use our brush tool. And we want to switch over to our paintbrush. And then we're going to go ahead and start painting in at 1 or 10% opacity. And we're going to start painting in our highlights for the neck of our bottle. So first off, I'm going to start with this bottom area, and I'm just going to work my way around the neck of the bottle, adding in where I think there should be reflection. So there'll probably be some reflected light like this, Now, when you see lines like this, or even rectangles that are filled in, what that is it's usually a window, or it's some sort of rectangular object off in the distance that has light coming through it or has light on it. And so that's what those lines are. They're reflecting something in the real world, or in this real world. It's not really a real world, it's a world we're creating. So we'll just go ahead and start roughing that in. Don't worry if it's not perfect, we can always come back and erase. And then I'm going to start softening in these edges, and I might even start drawing in sort of a highlight like so. Same on this side, might add more of a highlight up here at the top. You just want to remember when you're doing reflections, it's not just light, it's actually reflecting something in the real world. So you want to think about what's in the real world and then try to replicate that being wrapped around your bottle. And then we're going to start drawing in an oval for this top area, and we're even going to start filling it in with solid white. And then down here, I'm going to start adding in a little bit more of a light area. And since we're looking more sort of at a down angle on this bottle, we're going to add in more of a rounded edge on this bottom part of the neck. And we're just going to keep layering this over and over again until we get it looking the way we want. So we'll layer, then we'll take away, and then we'll layer, and we'll take away. And we can switch between this brush and a soft edged brush. There aren't really any rules. There's just more of guidelines. All that really matters in the end is that it looks good. Alright, so now I'm going to switch over to a soft edged brush. This is just so that it gives it more of a transition from one color to the transparency. Okay, so now like I said, we can go ahead and go in there with our erase tool, and I'm going to switch over to a soft edge brush. We're already on one, so that's perfect. And I'm going to go ahead and start erasing away areas that I don't want. And I'm going to put my brush opacity at 20%. That way I can work away areas without erasing it all at once. So I'm going to erase out this whole area right there. I might start to soften this right here. I might make more of a hard edge on this edge right here. And then down here I can go ahead and start erasing also. And I just want to keep working it until I get it looking the way I want it. And then we can switch back over to our paintbrush tool, and then we can go ahead and start painting in with that again. Alright, perfect. Let's go ahead and zoom out and see how that looks. Alright, it's looking pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and zoom back in there and work it just a little bit more. Alright, let's see how that looks. So I think it looks pretty good. Now we want to add some more atmosphere inside of our bottle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new layer underneath all of my layers except for my bottle shape layer. And then I'm going to zoom in there, and I want to grab an orange. So I'm going to come into that orange, and we want it to be completely saturated. And then using my brush with a soft edge, I'm going to go ahead and, whoops, that's not a soft edge. Make sure you're on a soft edge. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to paint in some more atmosphere in here. And what atmosphere means is it just almost means more of like a haze, more of a fog. And then I can switch over to more of a yellow color. I'm going to make that a little bit lighter. And then I'm going to add some atmosphere up in here too, but I'm going to switch over to more of a pinkish color. Hit OK. And I'll bring my brush size down. I'm going to bring my opacity down to 10%. I just want to add just a tiny little bit in there. That just breathes some more life into the inside of our potion. Next, what we want to do is we want to add some bubbles into our potion. So I'm going to add a new layer above my potion liquid layer. And on this layer, I'm going to switch over to the color dark gray. So somewhere about there. And then I'm gonna go ahead and paint in a spot, but I wanna make sure I'm on a hard edged brush, and I wanna bring my brush opacity all the way up to 100%, and I'll just paint that spot in just like so. Then we can go ahead and zoom in there and select the color white. Then using my brush tool and bringing my brush size down, I'm gonna paint at 10% opacity, and I wanna just start painting a very light edge along this edge of my circle. And then I'm gonna paint a little bit more inside here and then highlight that a little bit more. And then up here, what I wanna do is I wanna add a much lighter highlight. So something like that type of shape. I can bring my brush size up just a little bit. We just wanna fill that shape out. Just like so. Perfect. Let's go ahead and zoom out and see how that looks. All right, now I know this doesn't look like much like a bubble yet, but what we want to do is we want to change the blend mode over here from normal to overlay. And so now that really fits more into our liquid, and it doesn't just look like a gray bubble sitting there. So what we want to do now is we want to go ahead and copy this. So I'm going to go ahead and use my grab and move tool, and then holding down Alt, I can drag another bubble over like so, and then I can drag another one over like so. And then I can go ahead and shrink one of those down using my transform tool. And then I can copy that smaller one over somewhere else, so maybe like down here. And then we can maybe copy one more. And maybe you want your bubbles to have a different type of variation, and so you can turn the opacity down on one of these to, I don't know, let's say about there, so it's a little bit lighter than the other bubbles. And it just makes it look a lot more interesting. Next, we're gonna add a new layer above this, and then using my brush tool, I wanna go ahead and select this orange right there. Any light orange will do. And I'm gonna go ahead and paint in sort of some texture up here. So I'm just painting some ovals, like so. And you want to paint them in as ovals and not circles, because you're looking at this plane in perspective, and so if they were circles, it wouldn't make any sense. Now that's looking a little bit too dark for me, so I'm going to go ahead and bring down the opacity to about 75%, and I think that looks much better. All right, great. The last thing we need to do is we need to add in a cork or a lid for our bottle. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in here up at the top, and we want to create this layer all the way up at the very top. And this one's not going to be a clipping layer mask because we want to create it outside of that shape. Then using my brush tool, I'm going to go ahead and select a dark purple color, so somewhere around in here, and then we'll come into our purples. We'll hit OK, maybe a little bit less desaturated or a little bit more desaturated. And then we're going to go ahead and paint in like so. And we want that a little bit wider, so maybe like so. And then I'm going to use my transform tool to squash that down to about there. Maybe a little bit more. And the reason why we did that is because that's going to give us the base for our cork. Now I'm going to shrink that down even a little bit more, like so. And then I'll recenter that. Perfect. So now what we want to do is we want to go ahead and copy this. So I'm going to hold down Alt and click and drag that away. And with this one, I'm going to go ahead and enlarge that so it's a little bit larger than my other oval down here. And then using my lasso tool, I can go ahead and connect all the edges. So I can go like this. And I can even give it a little bit of curve just to make it look interesting. Same with this side. But you just want to connect those and then fill that area in. So now we have the shape of our cork. Now it's kind of hard to see because it's a dark purple. Next, let's go ahead and merge these two layers together. So I'll select both of them, merge, and then we want to create a new layer above that, right click, and create clipping layer mask. So on this clipping layer mask, we're going to add in our first layer of highlight. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my dark purple, and I'm going to lighten that a little bit, and I'm going to come up more towards the reds, hit OK, and that's going to be my first highlight color. So I'm going to start painting in the form like so, and I have my brush opacity set to 10%. So I might start with this top form area. I might start painting that around like an oval, and then I'll start painting in these edges, and I'm painting these edges in because it'd probably be getting hit by light. And then over here, we might even paint it in more light on this area right here and leave this edge a little bit darker because maybe the light source is coming more from this side over here. So I'll go ahead and start painting it in like so. All right, perfect. So now we have our first layer of highlight, and you can see it's a little bit messy, and that's okay. Next, we want to grab an even lighter highlight color, so I'm going to come up to about there. And I'm going to come more into my oranges. We'll hit OK. And then I'm going to go ahead and start painting that in. Now we can even come more towards the saturated side just to make it more interesting. Since our purple is desaturated, we want to make sure that our highlight colors are pretty saturated. Otherwise, it's going to get really boring and bland because there's not going to be any real saturated color in there. We can go ahead and still paint in a little bit more highlight on this edge just to make it stand out. And then I'm going to grab another highlight color, so I'm going to come even lighter and come way more into my oranges, so about there should be good. And I forgot, let's make it a little bit more saturated, and then we'll go ahead and start painting in that. Now it's looking a little bit too blurry, so what I want to do is I want to switch over to my brush tool so it has a little bit more of a hard edge while we're painting. And you'll see here I'm getting really messy with it. It doesn't have to be perfect, and it's going to make it a lot more interesting if it doesn't look perfect. So when you can see those brush strokes in there, that's what makes it look really good. And then what we can do to make these look more interesting is, rather than having all these transparent colors layered on top of each other, we can go ahead and select one of these colors and switch back over to our brush tool and put it at 100%, and that's just going to give us more of an interesting look because it's going to be a lot more opaque when we paint with it. Same with up here on the top area. And then we can bring our brush opacity back down to 5% or 50%. We can paint some more with that. And then we're going to grab our last highlight color. So I'm going to come up to about there, and we want to be more saturated. And we'll come up into our yellows, and then we can go ahead and paint our highlights with that. And we only want to add this into certain areas. So maybe along this edge, maybe up here. Perfect. And then maybe we want to add some texture to this. So the way we'll do that is we're going to add a new layer above this, drag it underneath and then above, so we get an automatic clipping layer mask. And then let's switch over to the color black, and we're going to go ahead and just paint in some interesting shapes and stuff. And we can bring our brush opacity up to 100%. And I'm just painting in some random spots. It doesn't have to be perfect. And then we want to change our blend mode from normal to soft light. And that's going to let some more of that color through, and we can bring the opacity down to, let's say, about 80%. Perfect. Let's go ahead and zoom out and see how that looks. All right, it doesn't seem to be standing out enough for me, so what I need to do is down here, I need to add a little bit more shadow. So I'm going to come back down to my bottom layer, and then using the black color and bring my brush opacity down to 10%, I'm going to go ahead and paint in a little bit more shadow along this bottom edge. And this is just going to help it look like it's actually going into the glass bottle. Another thing we can do to make it look more like it's going into the glass bottle is we can grab a white color, and then we're going to add a new layer above all these layers, so it's not going to be a clipping layer mask at all. And then we're going to bring our brush opacity up to 80%, and then we can go ahead and paint along this edge like so, and that's also going to help it look like it's actually going into the glass, because it's going to make this look like it's more of an edge on the glass. Now let's go ahead and zoom out and see how that looks. All right, I think that works much better. Now I want to add a little bit more highlight on this top area of our cork, so I'm going to go ahead and select our yellow highlight color, and then with my brush at 30% opacity, and I need to come back down to my clipping layer mask, I'm going to go ahead and paint in that area. We're actually going to bring our brush opacity down to 10%. We just want to slowly layer that in and lighten that top area. That way we just get the impression that the light source is coming from the top. All right, let's see how that looks. Perfect. I think that stands out a lot more now. Now, the last thing we can do is we can add a shadow and a refracted light onto the surface of our floor. So let's go ahead and do that. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to come all the way down to our bottom layer, and we're going to add a new layer underneath that. So it's underneath our shape layer. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and zoom in there, and then using my brush tool and switching over to a soft edged brush and making it very large, probably about the size of my bottle, I'm going to go ahead and paint in with a peach color. So I'm going to come into my oranges, almost orange red, and then I'm going to grab a light peach color. I'll hit OK. Then I'm going to go ahead and paint in a spot like so. And we probably want to paint it a little bit higher, that way we don't get any of this edge cut off. And then using my transform tool, I can go ahead and squash that. And then using my brush tool, I can go ahead and So I'm going to squash it down to about that size. And then I can squash it in the other direction horizontally and then squash it down a little bit more again. So something about like that. I'll hit OK. And then what we want to do is we want to go ahead and copy this layer. And then what we want to do is we want to enlarge that. So we'll enlarge it like so, and we'll hold down Alt so it keeps it in the center. And then we'll hit Enter. And we're going to drag that layer underneath our other layer, our smaller one. And then bringing up our hue and saturation panel by hitting Control U or Command U if you're on a Mac, we can go ahead and now drag down the lightness on that. So that larger one becomes a shadow. We hit OK. And then we'll grab our peach color and we can go ahead and drag the opacity down on that layer so it's not so strong. So maybe about there should be good. Let's see how that looks. Perfect. Now the position is a little bit incorrect, so I can go ahead and grab both those layers and nudge it up a little bit more. And we can even transform it and turn it a little bit more, like so. Now, the last thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and make this bottle actually transparent. So right now with the black shape of our bottle behind it, it's not allowing us to see the gray background behind it. So if you had your bottle on a game background, you wouldn't be able to see that background through it because of that black layer. So what we need to do to fix that is we first need to select the shape of our bottle by hitting Control or Command and then clicking the thumbnail of that shape layer. And now what we want to do is we want to, one at a time, come onto our next layer, and then we'll hit Control-Shift-I to invert the selection, and then we'll hit Delete. So anything that was outside of the shape of our bottle will get deleted. And we're going to do that all the way up until we get to our cork. So I'm going to come up to the next layer, hit Delete, 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 Delete. And the reason why we're doing this is because we need to delete the bottle shape, and if we do that, there's not going to be a shape for any of these clipping layer masks to attach to. So now you'll see if we go ahead and drag that layer down like so, it doesn't affect all of our clipping layer masks, even though they're not clipping layer masks anymore. So now we can go ahead and delete that layer, and we're fine, and you can see that we can see the gray background through it now. Alright, that brings us to the end of this tutorial. I really hope you learned something from this and gained some real good value. Thanks for watching, my name's Jason, and have a great life. If you enjoyed this tutorial, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and I'll be sending you many more videos just like this one.